The last shadow in your room isn't yours. Don't turn around. Part 1. The shadow in the corner. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just my imagination. You know that feeling? When you're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone, and out of the corner of your eye, something shifts. Just a trick of the light, you tell yourself. Just your own shadow stretching across the wall as you move. But shadows don't breathe. It started small. A flicker of movement near the closet. A darkness in the corner of my room that seemed thicker than it should be. Like ink bleeding into the air. I'd blink, and it would be gone. I chalked it up to exhaustion, to late nights and too much caffeine. Then, one night, I woke up freezing. My room was ice cold, my breath fogging in the air. And there, standing at the foot of my bed, was a shadow. Tall. Too tall. Its edges wavered like smoke, but its shape was unmistakable. A person. A person with its head tilted too far to the side, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. This isn't real. This isn't real. When I opened them again, it was gone. But the cold lingered. And from that night on, I felt it. A presence. A weight pressing against the air, like something was standing just behind me, waiting for me to turn around. Part 2. The whisper in the dark. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was sleep paralysis, stress, anything rational. But the shadow kept coming back. It never moved when I looked at it directly. No, it only appeared in reflections. In the blackened screen of my TV, in the mirror when I glanced away for just a second. Always behind me, always closer than before. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, just a rustling, like fabric brushing against the wall. But soon, they became words. Don't turn around. A voice like dry leaves scraping against concrete. It didn't come from any direction. It was just there, inside my head, outside of it. I stopped sleeping, started keeping every light on. But the shadow thrived in the brightness, its outline sharper, more defined, and the voice grew louder. You don't want to see me? One night I broke. I spun around, fists clenched, ready to scream. Nothing. Just my empty room. And then, from right behind my ear, so close I felt its breath, I said, "Don't turn around." Part 3. The face in the reflection. I stopped looking in mirrors, but the shadow didn't. I'd catch it in the glass. Not my reflection, but its face. A hollow-eyed grin stretched too wide, its features melting like wax. It mimicked my movements, but wrong, delayed, like it was learning. Then, one day, it stopped copying me. It waved, on its own. I smashed the mirror. But that night, as I lay trembling in bed, my phone buzzed. A notification. A new photo in my gallery. It was a selfie I didn't take. My face, pale with terror. And behind me, the shadow's hands gripping my shoulders. Its mouth open in a silent scream. Illustre. Part 4. The final warning. I tried to run, stayed at a friend's house, but the shadow followed. It was in every window, every dark corner, and the whispers became a chant. Don't turn around, don't turn around, don't turn around. Last night, I felt its fingers brush my neck, cold, brittle, and I realized it wasn't warning me. It was begging. The last shadow in your room isn't yours. Don't turn around. The flickering light of your bedside lamp casts long, wavering shadows against the walls, shapes that stretch and twist like living things. You've always told yourself it's just the play of light, the way your tired eyes deceive you in the late hours. But tonight, something feels different. The air is too still, too heavy, as if the room itself is holding its breath. And then you see it, the shadow in the corner, the one that doesn't move when you do, the one that stands just a little too tall, its edges too sharp, its presence too deliberate. A whisper slithers through your mind. Don't turn around, because the last shadow in your room isn't yours. This isn't just a story. This is a warning. Part 1. The shadow in the corner. Lena had always been a light sleeper. The smallest sound, a creaking floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, would jolt her awake. But lately, the noises in her apartment had taken on a new quality. They weren't just random, they were deliberate. A soft scrape against the hardwood, like something dragging itself closer. A breath, slow and assured, from the corner of the room where nothing stood. At first, she blamed exhaustion. Working late shifts at the hospital had frayed her nerves, and the stress was playing tricks on her mind. But then, she saw the shadow. It was 3:17 a.m. when she first noticed it. The digital clock's glow painted the room in an eerie blue, and there, just beyond the edge of her vision, was a shape, tall, hunched, standing perfectly still. Her breath hitched. "It's just the coat rack," she told herself. Except, she didn't own a coat rack. She squeezed her eyes shut, counting to 10. When she opened them again, the shadow was gone. Relief washed over her, until she felt it. A cold, bony finger tracing the curve of her spine. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something deeper, something primal, whispered, "Don't turn around. Don't let it see your face." The next morning, she convinced herself it had been a nightmare. But that night, the shadow returned, and this time, it spoke. A voice like grinding glass slithered into her ear. "You're not alone in here." Part 2. The Thing That Watches. Lena stopped sleeping. Coffee and adrenaline fueled her days, but the nights were unbearable. She installed extra lights, hoping to banish the shadows, but the darkness always found a way. It pooled in the corners, thick and hungry, and the thing within it grew bolder. She caught glimpses of it in reflections, a gaunt face with hollow eyes, grinning from the bathroom mirror. She heard it scratching at the walls, as if trying to claw its way out of the very air. And worst of all, she felt its gaze. Heavy, relentless. Her friends noticed the change. "You look like hell," her co-worker Mark said, eyeing the dark circles beneath her eyes. She wanted to tell him, to beg for help, but the words died in her throat. Because the shadow was there too, lurking just behind Mark's shoulder, its fingers twitching as if eager to reach out. That night, she broke. She spun around, screaming, "What do you want?" The room fell silent. Then, from the darkness, a chuckle. "You weren't supposed to turn around." Part 3. The Final Shadow. The last thing Lena ever saw was her own reflection, wide-eyed, trembling as the shadow stepped forward, its form unraveling into something monstrous. "The last shadow in your room isn't yours. Don't turn around." Part 1. The Unseen Presence. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just my imagination. A trick of the light, maybe. A figment of my tired mind after too many late nights. But then, it stayed. And it moved. It started with the shadows in my bedroom, the way they stretched just a little too long, a little too wrong. My room was small, a cramped apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building that groaned at night like it was alive. The streetlight outside cast an orange glow through the blinds, painting jagged lines across my walls. And that's when I saw it, the shadow that didn't belong. It stood in the corner, tall and impossibly thin, its edges flickering like static. At first, I thought it was just the silhouette of my coat rack, but then I blinked, and the coat rack was empty. The shadow remained. I told myself it was nothing, just exhaustion, just stress. But the next night, it was closer, and the night after that, closer still. It never moved when I was looking directly at it, only in the corners of my vision, only when I turned my back. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like distant radio static, then clearer, a voice dry and cracked, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out. It came from the shadow, and it was learning my name. I stopped sleeping, I kept the lights on, but the shadow didn't care. It thrived in the light just as much as the dark, and no matter where I looked, I could feel it behind me, breathing, waiting. One rule kept me alive: don't turn around, because the moment I did, it would be the last thing I ever saw. "No, Part 2. The Rules of Survival. I wasn't the first to see it. After weeks of terror, I dug through old forums, desperate for answers. That's when I found the stories, scattered accounts of people who had encountered the same thing. A shadow that watched, a presence that fed on fear, and all of them had one thing in common. Rule number 1, never acknowledge it. Looking at it directly made it stronger. It fed on attention, on fear. The more you noticed it, the more real it became. Rule number 2, never turn your back for too long. It moved when you weren't looking. If you left the room, it would be waiting when you returned. Closer, always closer. Rule number 3, never let it whisper your name. Because once it knew you, it would never leave. I followed the rules. I kept my eyes down. I slept facing the door. But the shadow was patient, and it was learning. One night, I woke up to the sound of my own name, not whispered, spoken. Clear as day, right beside my ear. My blood turned to ice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I remembered the most important rule. Don't turn around, because whatever was behind me wasn't human. Part 3. The Final Warning. It's been 6 months since I first saw the shadow. 6 months of sleepless nights, of paranoia, of jumping at every flicker of movement. I thought I could outlast it. I thought if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. I was wrong. Last night, I made a mistake. I turned, just for a second, just a glance over my shoulder, and I saw it. Tall, gaunt, a face stretched too wide, too many teeth, too many eyes. It smiled at me, and then, nothing. When I woke up, my room was empty. The shadow was gone. Relief flooded through me. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had won. But then I caught my reflection in the mirror, and my shadow wasn't moving with me. Conclusion. Don't look behind you. If you're reading this, listen carefully. You've seen it too, haven't you? The shadow that doesn't match. The whisper in the dark. The feeling of something standing just behind you, breathing down your neck. Remember the rules. Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it learn your name. And whatever you do, don't turn around, because the last shadow in your room isn't yours, and it's waiting for you to make a mistake. The last shadow in your room isn't yours. Don't turn around. Part 4. The Reflection That Watches Back. At first, I thought my reflection was just lagging, a trick of the dim light, a delay in perception. But then my reflection blinked when I didn't. It smiled when I wasn't. And worst of all, when I stepped away from the mirror, my shadow stayed behind, pressed against the glass like a stain. I covered every mirror in my apartment. I taped black paper over the TV screen. I even avoided puddles on the street, terrified of catching a glimpse of what was now following me. But the shadow didn't need reflections anymore. It had learned me. That night, I woke up to the sound of scratching. Long, slow drags of fingernails against my bedroom wall. I lay frozen, my breath shallow, my fingers digging into the sheets. The scratching moved, from the wall, to the foot of my bed, then up the mattress. Something was crawling toward me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look, don't turn around. A cold breath touched my ear. You're mine now. Part 5. The Vanishing Neighbor. I wasn't the only one in the building who had seen it. Mrs. Henderson, the old woman who lived across the hall, stopped answering her door. When the super finally checked her apartment, they found her rocking chair still swaying, her tea still warm. But Mrs. Henderson was gone. The only thing left was a single sentence scratched into the wall above her bed. I turned around. Then it was Mr. Chen from the 3rd floor. He vanished one night after complaining about the thing in the corner of his laundry room. His keys were still on the counter. His phone was still charging, but his shadow wasn't. I started sleeping with the lights on and a knife under my pillow. But the shadow didn't care about locks or doors or light. It only cared about one thing, making me turn around. Part 6. The Thing in the Photographs. I found the old Polaroid camera in a thrift store, a stupid purchase maybe, but I needed proof. If I could catch the shadow on film, maybe someone would believe me. The first photo was normal, just my empty bedroom. The second photo showed a dark smudge in the corner. The third photo showed it standing right behind me. I threw the camera across the room. My hands shook as I grabbed the photos, flipping through them in horror. In each one, the shadow was closer, and in the last one, taken just seconds before I threw the camera, it had a hand on my shoulder. I burned the pictures, but the smell of smoke didn't cover the scent of rot that clung to my apartment now. And when I checked the mirror the next morning, my reflection wasn't the only one staring back. Part 7. The final choice. It's been a year. The shadow doesn't hide anymore. It stands in the corner of every room, watching, waiting. It whispers my name in voices that aren't human. It pulls at my clothes when I walk past. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I just exist. A prisoner in my own home. Last night I broke. I screamed at it. "What do you want?" The room went silent. Then from the darkness a single word. "Look, I won't. I can't." But the worst part? I'm starting to want to. Final warning. If you're reading this, it's already in your room. You've seen the flicker in the corner of your eye. You felt the cold spot on the back of your neck. You've heard the whisper that wasn't there. It's patient, it's hungry, and it will make you turn around. So do yourself a favor. Close your eyes and pray it doesn't touch you first.